I think we are going to go ahead and get started though, because I have been told that I have to stop at 3 o'clock exactly. By the way, there are no watches on me, so you're going to have to tell me when it's 3 o'clock because I can talk for days and days on this topic. My name is Dr. Nanette Odell, and I'm the President and CEO of LifeQuest Training Consulting. And I'm here because I have lived and or worked with people with disabilities literally my entire life. This is what I do pretty much 24/7. 2 weeks from right now, I'm going to be on an airplane to France. I'll be speaking at a European disability conference in Grenoble, France, and very, very honored to do so. I'm thankful that I've been able to take my passion and really help enable others, specifically business owners, to work towards a greater compliance. You guys are probably all very, very well aware of the lawsuits that have been happening for quite a while now. When I spoke last year about the same time, we were talking a lot about pool lifts. The hotels were being hit really hard related to pool lifts. And fortunately, they seem to have died down here in the Phoenix or in Arizona. Unfortunately, they are, from what I understand, in Southern California. But you guys are all, again, probably quite well aware of the fact that then parking lots became a very, very easy target. And there's a whole lot more parking lots out there than there are pool lifts. And so there has been a lot of warning letters, I should say. From what I understand, approximately 42,000 warning letters have gone out. Just blanket sent out throughout all of Maricopa County. I think it's gone beyond that. But regardless of what the Attorney General is doing, the damage in a sense has been done. And when I say the damage, the organization who has done this actually approached me and asked if I would endorse them. And I tried very hard not to laugh really loud right in front of them, but I explained very clearly that I do not support their intimidation tactics. My motto is to educate and not intimidate. And that's why I'm here today, because the truth is that we do need to take the law serious. This is a civil rights law. It's been around for 26 years. And the Department of Justice is, by the way, not very sympathetic to what's happening, in the sense that I go to a lot of ADA conferences, and I also speak at a lot of ADA conferences. And one of the fortunate things is that I have the opportunity to talk to representatives directly from the Department of Justice and the Access Board. The Access Board writes the laws, the Department of Justice enforces them. And when we present to them what's happening in Arizona, the response we get is, they had 26 years. Oh, absolutely, we understand, but here's what's happening in Arizona. They had 26 years. We agree, and yes, the businesses should have complied before. However, they had 26 years, and that's the response we're getting back from the Department of Justice. Essentially, they're saying, you know what, we're done. They've had 26 years to comply. They don't comply yet, we're washing our hands. They need to comply, and that's it. So it's not because the Department of Justice doesn't care. They do. They care a lot about you, but they are there to represent people with disabilities and to ensure equal access. Unfortunately, every single case that I've been out on, whether it's a lawsuit or whether it's someone who's saying, you know what, before the lawsuit happens, please come take a look at my property, 100% of the time I find things that are wrong, 100% of the time. And even if it's a brand new build, I find things that need to be modified. And the reason why is because the architects, the planners, the contractors, the builders, they're all coming in and they have to think about a lot of things. The people that come in from the cities and they do the codes inspections and everything, they have a lot of things to think about in relation to safety, foundation, supports, plumbing, electricity, fire safety, all of those things. They're looking at all of those things, and it's real easy, I suppose, to miss the ADA stuff. Well, I have sort of tunnel vision. That is all I see, and everywhere I go, this is what I see. So I'm here because I want to make sure that I help empower you guys to go out and take a look at yourself. For those of you who've really started taking a look at some of this stuff, you're probably going to notice more and more things around your own properties. You're going to notice things at other properties, and hopefully this awareness is really going to help us do what we can to, you guys have not sat down yet, you're more than welcome to come sit right up here. My friends, get over here. It's so good to see you. Come here. So we're just going to get started here, and we're going to kind of go through with this, but you guys have, of course, you have a tip sheet, and I made this tip sheet for you guys last year. There's been a lot of really exciting things that have happened since then. Some exciting things is that I've been out to see some of your properties. What happened though after last year is we were bombarded with requests to come out and review properties. And I will be the first to admit that we got overwhelmed. We truly did. Both my husband and I worked full-time jobs, and we were going out every single weekend. I think from Friday afternoon till Sunday morning or Sunday night, reviewing properties. And so for those of you who it was a little bit late getting your report, I do so apologize. We've worked really hard day and night. Like I had dark black hair last year, and now it's like almost completely gray because we don't sleep anymore. We work really hard, but we've come up with some really fantastic ways to make our system more effective so that we can work better with you. There is a disclaimer here that I hope you read, because essentially it says that AAHOA does not provide business or legal advice, and there is the advice right there that you guys have read. I want to go in and talk a little bit about, people with disabilities, the fastest growing minority population in the world, okay? A lot of people don't necessarily recognize that this fastest growing minority population has discretionary spending power of approximately $175 billion. That's an awful lot of money, because they represent not only themselves, but of course their families and their friends that are traveling with them, and more people are traveling. And so we really want to make sure that we're recognizing that we're not talking about just a small group of people. Equal access is equal access for everybody. But we are talking about a lot of people we want to create access for. Now, the Department of Justice says that in terms of what they call readily achievable barrier removal. So readily achievable barrier removal is essentially, if you have a building that was built prior to about March of 2012, for example, you fell more under the 91 standards, okay? But you need to come up to the 2010 standards. And in some cases, that may or may not be readily achievable. And so readily achievable barrier removal kind of lists out these 4 priorities. The first and foremost one is accessible approach and entrance. So all those parking lots out there? You can have this magnificent building, 100% compliant. And by the way, I'd love to see that. But if your parking isn't compliant, and if people can't actually get in your doors, it makes it really difficult for them to enjoy your amenities. So that's actually number 1. Access to goods and services, that would be your facilities. Bathrooms, number 1 culprit, by the way. When I go in and I review a bathroom, there's approximately 80 questions I'm going down through, and 80 pictures I potentially take as I go down through a bathroom. We actually have some people here who have gone through surveys with me, and at the end gone, oh my gosh, right? This is a whole lot more than what we thought. And so there really is a lot to this, but it's very important. And then number 4 was other measures. So again, because parking lots are a really big thing right now, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. The lawsuits that are happening in these warning letters, by the way, they're pretty much copy, paste, copy, paste. I've seen many of them, and they're exact duplicates except the address has changed. And so they almost always mention things like scope, signage, and dispersion. So we're going to talk a little bit more about each of those. Scope essentially means how many parking spaces do you have? Do you have the number that you're supposed to have? So I'm going to give you guys a couple of examples of some things that we've seen. One of them very recently is a fairly small hotel here in the East Valley. And technically, based on the total number of spaces that they have, they're only supposed to have 2 accessible spaces. And they have their 2 accessible spaces near their 2 accessible rooms. But there isn't a space over next to the lobby, which is on another part of the parking lot altogether. So technically, even though they have the scope requirements, they also are supposed to have dispersion, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. But they're supposed to have that dispersion where not only can they park next to the ADA rooms, but they can also come up to the lobby, they can ask questions, they can check in, and then they can go around. Does that make sense? And so the scope requirement is the bare minimum. If you're looking at a strip mall, and we have worked with a lot of strip malls and large-scale malls over this last year, we're not just looking at the total number, but we're also looking at if you have 10 different retail entrances, you need to make sure that you have accessible parking. That doesn't mean you have to have 10 accessible parking spaces. That would be dependent upon your total number. But you do need to make sure you have to have parking dispersed out between those. So again, this scope here is the minimum, okay? The next thing is signage. Now we have seen a lot of lawsuits related to this, where the sign is too low. Now the truth is does this hurt a person with a disability? No, it really doesn't hurt them, but it is still the law. And so it's important that we make sure that we comply with this. This is a really easy one. And again, one of the reasons why we have this title is sort of empowered to evaluate is I really want you all to go out to your parking lots as soon as possible this week and measure your parking signs. Just measure from the ground up to the bottom of the sign. Now there are some real questions. Well, is it the ground to the sign or is it the parking space to the sign? Because in some cases there's the parking space and then up on the curb is where the sign is actually posted, right? So the thing is the 91 standards didn't specify, and the 2010 standards didn't specify. So I asked directly the Department of Justice, the Access Board. They wrote the law, and I said, which is it? And they said, it's not clear. Well, could you do that? Could you make it clearer for us, please? What it does say is that you have to be able to, it has to be, number one, a minimum of 60. You have to, with a parked vehicle there, be able to still see the sign. Well, you've got some big SUVs out there that you're not going to be able to see a sign at 5 foot anyways, right? What I would suggest is that if there is any question at all, well, it's not 60 inches from this, but it is from that. Just raise the sign up. I would truly encourage you guys to err on the side of caution. In fact, I would go so far as to say put it to 72, put it to 80 inches. Bring it way up there. Make it really obvious by anybody driving by that that sign is definitely high enough, okay? Because here's the thing, if they see that sign's not high enough, or they even suspect it's not high enough, you could get one of those letters, and now you're dealing with everything else. And I really don't think it's worth it to have to deal with everything else when you could have just brought your sign up, okay? The sign does not have to be on a pole, by the way. It could be up on a wall right in front of the space too, okay? But that's really important. Now, I'm not going to advise you to necessarily go with what I call the cool wheelchair sign, and that would be the sporty sign. You can do that for the actual space as you paint it in, but for the sign itself on the wall that has the Arizona Revised Statute, I can't legally advise you to do that because the Department of Justice does not recognize the cool sign. We're pushing to get them to change the rules with that, but for now, I would suggest you go with the standard sign, okay? And make sure you have that van accessible space on there. Now you can see here's an example of accessible parking, and this is a perfect example. And one of the things I have been truly sad to see is a lot I have seen where people have actually put the curb cut down into the access aisle. And I really want to know who is doing that. What company is out there? I'm not kidding you, by the way. We're going to chat. Because whatever company is literally putting a curb cut into the access aisle is truly going completely against what the law is permitting. And the people who own the property are going to have that all removed. And I'm seeing it a lot lately, and it's truly sad to see. So please, 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 take a look at what these pictures show. I think we're going to, I know you guys are going to have this on your website. Call, ask me questions. I'd be more than happy to give you some quick advice, but please do not allow that to go in there. And I'm going to show you a picture of why in a moment. Again, we've got some examples right here. Here's another example of dispersion. You can see over there to the one picture, there's a large strip mall, and I think there was, again, about 10 different entrances to retail spaces. Where's the ADA spaces? They're right there in the corner. By the way, where's the access aisle for those two ADA spaces? It doesn't exist. So there isn't an access aisle there. So number one, those two spaces aren't compliant because there's no access aisle there. Number two is there's no dispersion. So somebody who's going into a retail space on one corner or the other, they're going to have to park without an access aisle and then go up and then go over. So what we recommended in this particular case was, number one, they need to restripe those two spaces and put the access aisle in between. Number two, they also need to create at least one space on each of those two ends. Now this is more than the minimum requirement for the scope, okay, the total number, but it does then do a better job in terms of meeting the dispersion requirements, okay? Does that make sense, the difference between the minimum scope and dispersion? You have to be able to have that dispersion out as much as possible. Okay, so again, what I want to encourage you guys to do is to evaluate the scope. Take a look at what's your total number. Do you have the minimum number at least? Measure your signs. Please go out and measure your signs. And then evaluate the dispersion. We get an awful lot done, by the way, just with Google Maps. We truly do. We can zoom down on your property, and I could practically over the phone say, this is what's going on. In fact, that's one of the things that we've started to do more and more is if you need us to come out to your property and we are swamped, and we're not able to as soon as you need us to, we've evaluated kind of a different type of payment or fee schedule so that we literally can be on the phone with you. We can zoom down on your property and we can kind of start snooping around just the outside and talk you through some things. And that hopefully will at least get you started on making some of the changes that you need to make as soon as possible. All right? Now I'm supposed to do this disclaimer, and the disclaimer essentially says that if you get a lawsuit, they may ask for documentation of any efforts towards compliance. Essentially what this says is if you write it down, they might find out that you know. But let me just tell you very clearly that if you don't do anything at all, you are a target. Because you can't claim ignorance. I mean, 26 years, all the lawsuits, all the media, It's a civil rights law. We really, really just need to do this. And in many cases, you guys, some of this stuff, especially the signage and the striping, it's really not that difficult to do. And there's tax incentives. So again, I'd really encourage you to really get started on that. Again, these are some of the suggestions I have. Put your address into Google, zoom it down, go out there, take a look at the total number of spaces, and start writing some of this down so you can evaluate it. Here's a particular property we did up north where you can see, this is kind of how we had done one of the properties was we Googled down, we obviously went up to the property, we measured we surveyed the entire hotel, but specifically the parking lot is what you see here where we wrote in the example of what they had and then we made the recommendations for what they need. Now I will tell you, and I don't have a way really to sort of point and like give you like a little sign right on it, but I don't know if you can see the yellow markings we have behind the parking spaces. We don't necessarily recommend that when there are other options. So if there's an option where you can truly bring your curb cut into the sidewalk, not the curb cut down into the access aisle, but up into the sidewalk, that's what we would encourage. With this particular property, the hotel line, and literally the hotel started right there at the edge of that space, that sidewalk. So there was no space to come in. So in that particular case where there's truly no way to do an access aisle up into the sidewalk, what we would really encourage you to do is put that striping back behind the parking spaces. It gives at least a little bit more of a visual warning to people driving in and out to watch out because a person in a wheelchair would be lower down and they might be crossing that path. Does that make sense? So this is one of the recommendations we had. Again, go out, measure your signage. Make sure that if it's a van accessible space, that it also says van accessible. Now we talk about the minimum scope requirements. Let's say that you have 24 parking spaces. You're required to have one ADA space. That one ADA space has to be a van accessible space. The difference between these is a van accessible space is 11 foot wide with a 5 foot access aisle. It could be 8 foot wide with an 8 foot access aisle, but I'll tell you we don't recommend that. And the reason why is this. Someone parks in that 8 foot space and they get out of their van and they go in and they need to come back out to change their colostomy bag, to take medication, and somebody else has parked in that 8 foot access aisle. Because you can park a car in an 8 foot access aisle, right? It's pretty easy to do. A little more difficult to park in a 5 foot space. So that person, by the way, may not be able to get back in their vehicle. That would be unfortunate. So again, we really want to encourage people to go with the 11 foot space with a 5 foot access aisle. But if you have 2 spaces, let's say you have 26 parking spaces, you're required to have 2. One of those has to be van accessible. Again, one of them always has to be that extra width, okay? Again, this is a pretty perfect space right here. We've got the parking space. This shows you a little bit more of a van accessible space with the 8 foot and 8 foot. But you can see the curb cut and you can see the signage right there. But I will tell you that evaluating a parking lot is a whole lot more than counting spaces, counting the width and the height of the sign. There's a lot more to it. I'm encouraging you guys to count your spaces, count your width, and measure your signs. I'm absolutely encouraging you to do that. It gets a little bit more technical in the sense that there's also slope requirements. So if you have a parking space that's along just a little bit of a hill and a person gets out of their vehicle and then their wheelchair starts to roll back, that's not a good idea, right? Or let's say in some cases that it's a little bit unlevel and they're sort of sideways, that's also not permitted. So you have to have what they call about a 2.08% slope, which is very, very minor, okay? So we have to calculate all of those things, including the curb cuts, the flares. There's a lot of other details that when we come out to your property, we look at all of that. Again, we can't come out to everybody's property, and you guys can certainly do an awful lot of it to get yourself started too. So we'd encourage you to do that. Do you see that big red circle down there? That's what we're seeing. We're seeing curb cuts or curb ramps into access aisles. Can you see why that's not going to work so well? I want you to really see that, and I want the person who's out there designing these and building these to see this picture too, please, because it makes it very, very difficult then for a person who's getting out of their wheelchair to be able to get into that space. So again, take a look at some of those things. If you have any of this at your properties, please get that changed as soon as possible. Okay, so from the parking lot, which is again one of the biggest pieces, okay? Going inside, again, encouraging you guys as much as possible to get started on some things. So you can start lowering your towel racks, your hair dryers, cosmetic mirrors, closet bars, curtain rods, ironing boards. And ironing boards, by the way, are kind of an interesting one. I don't know if I have a picture there. I have a picture of an ironing board down there. Do you see that? I kind of like that idea where the ironing board can be down a little bit lower. Now this is one that just flips out of the wall, but you can have one, you can set that up lower even, so that the top of that piece of it there is at 48 inches maximum. But this gives you some ideas of some of the things that you can start doing now. Another thing I want to encourage you to do when you go back to your properties is close your fists all together and then start walking through your property and see, can I open the doors? If it's a knob door, you need to change that for a lever door. If it's one of those tiny little locks where you literally have to use these two little fingers to twist it, get one of those big locks that you could use your fist to push over to open it up, okay? So again, imagine a person, for example, who has severe arthritis, who cannot do this motion that so many of us will take for granted, right? So think of everything with that closed fist and start lowering things. Again, here's some other examples. You don't want anybody, for example, to be coming to your hotel and have to reach way, way up to your countertop. Or what we see sometimes is we see the lower counter, they meant well, they have the lower counter, but it's way over to the side and people don't even know it's there. And if they do know it's there, a lot of times there's things on the counter and it makes it difficult then for them to interact. So then what you have is someone comes around and someone's like, whoosh, and trying to knock everything off the counter to quickly serve the person, right? So leaving that open is a good idea, or making it so it's really easy to move things to the side. You guys are more than welcome to come this way if you'd like. No one's gonna call attention to you at all except me if you sit way over there. Okay, so again, start changing out some hardware. You've got, another thing is the curtain rods. So here's what normal curtain rods are, right? You have to take these fingers and you have to twist them to open and to close the curtain rod. To twist it open and close, what I encourage you to do is get one of these ones where you can literally kind of put your fist through and bring those over. You can see all of this stuff is stuff that can work really pretty well for a person with a closed fist. Bathrooms, making sure that you have access on the side of the toilet. And the reason why is this. A lot of people who are in wheelchairs, they need to transfer over to a toilet, okay? So sometimes they might transfer from the front, but in many cases they transfer to the side, kind of kitty corner like you see here, and then they take those grab bars and they slide themselves over. So again, making sure that you have that clear floor space next to your toilet is important. What we see in some cases is we see bathrooms where it's almost impossible to do that. We see a lot of times where there's a men's and women's bathroom. Neither of them are compliant at all. And so what we oftentimes suggest is that you make two unisex bathrooms. So you have one bathroom that has a stall and a urinal, and you have another bathroom that has two stalls, and neither one of them are compliant. What we'll oftentimes suggest is that you make them both unisex bathrooms and make the women's bathroom a unisex accessible bathroom, if that's the most feasible. Most of the time it is. A couple reasons we do that is because number one, nobody seems to want to remove a urinal. Nobody wants to remove a urinal. Number one. Number two is in some cases it's actually easier to just redo the women's bathroom, to just take out the stall itself and the two stalls and then make that one single bathroom. You cap off the other toilet. And again, there's a lot of more details to that, but that's a lot of times what we suggest. And then you would indicate that they're both unisex bathrooms, okay? This is, I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but this is something I brought up last time, and this was from a letter from the Department of Justice to the American Hotel and Lodging Association. And I'm just going to point out some really minor pieces here, or major pieces, but just some real quick lines. What essentially the Department of Justice is saying is that you need to develop a plan to meet the ongoing barrier removal obligations, okay? So essentially here's what happens is the ADA says you need to be here, and you review your property and you find out you're right here. And that's pretty typical, by the way. A transition plan says you need to go from here up to here. Now that does not mean you have to have this all done in 3 months. Whatever you can do in the next 3 months would be great, especially anything that's outside in the public that can be easily seen down from Google Earth, where these lawsuits are kind of happening. But either way, you need to have some kind of a plan so that you can start working towards that. One of the things that we do is we kind of came up with a system where we have like a 5-point, like a 5-star hotel type of thing. So a 5 would be compliant. And a 4 would be, it's not compliant, but it's a really easy fix. Like it's a doorknob. Like I could probably do that myself, right? A 3 is a little more complicated. It's, for example, installing a grab bar. Now you might not think it's difficult to install a grab bar, but you have to have the backing behind it because you really don't want to just put that grab bar into the drywall and then someone uses that grab bar to get themselves on or off the toilet and the grab bar comes out of the wall. That would be very bad. So again, you have to make sure you have that backing. A 2 would be something like you're actually going to have to move that toilet. And a 1 would be, it's technically infeasible. Now I have a lot of people who go, it's technically infeasible, right? right? Wink, wink, wink. And I said, no, actually, I can figure out a way to do this. No, 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 it's technically infeasible. I had someone tell me it is. We had that happen a lot with the pool lifts. It's not going to be easy, but no, it is technically feasible. We found very, very few cases. So please, please, please make sure that you really get a second opinion. If someone says technically infeasible, get it in writing. Get a second opinion, okay? How am I doing on time, by the way? 30 minutes to go? Sweet, all right. Anytime you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to let me know. So this is, again, the kind of the thing I just mentioned, the sort of the 5-point scale. And the reason we do this is because when we give you this report could be really quite large. I think the biggest one we had was about 1,200-page report. That's a lot of stuff. And the first thing you want to do is you want to go down to the summary and see what are all the fours, what are all the things that are pretty easy to fix that we can start doing pretty quickly. And then you look at the threes and go, okay, and by the way, look at the whole thing, because you don't want to just make a little change when you're going to have to make a big change that's going to wipe it all out. That, you know, something you could do right away. So take a look at the whole thing, but we want to give you some tools so that you can get started right away. So some of the surveys you can see we're measuring, good grief, I said there's like 80 questions in bathrooms. So, you know, how far is the grab bar from the wall? How high is it? How far does it go out? There's a lot of things that we take